Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang kami hormati KPS S2 Kajian Wanita, Ibu Maharani Pertiwi, PhD. Yang kami hormati dosen pendidik pada program Magister Kajian Wanita, serta Bapak Ibu mahasiswa peserta kuliah 3-in-1 pada pagi hari ini yang kami banggakan. Kami ucapkan selamat datang dan terima kasih kepada Prof. Benjamina Paula Gonzalez, PhD, salah satu dosen tamu kita pada pagi hari ini. Selamat pagi, Prof. Good morning. Ya, dengan mengucapkan syukur pada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa atas berkat dan rahmat-Nya, kita masih diberikan kesehatan pada hari ini, pada hari Sabtu 17 Mei 2025, pada rangkaian kegiatan kuliah 3-in-1, program Magister Kajian Wanita Sekolah Pascasarjana Universitas Brawijaya, dengan tema Correctly Analysis the Theory and Concept of Care-Focused Feminism to Care Different Voice, and focus on care as a moral relationship pada from a cultural feminist perspective. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, kami informasikan bahwa program 3-in-1 ini adalah salah satu program unggulan dari Universitas Brawijaya yang ditujukan untuk meningkatkan kualitas, kapasitas, dan kompetensi lulusan menggunakan 3 sumber belajar, yaitu dari dosen luar negeri, dosen dari praktisi, dan juga dosen internal UB yang saat ini sedang kita ikuti bersama, yaitu program kuliah 3-in-1 oleh pengajar dari luar negeri, yaitu dengan Prof. Benjamina Paula Gonzalez, PhD. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, sebelum kita simak bersama acara ini, dan demi kelancaran acara pada hari ini, kami silakan untuk sejenak menundukkan kepala dan berdoa sesuai dengan agama dan kepercayaan masing-masing. Berdoa kami persilahkan. Baik, terima kasih. Berdoa dapat diakhiri. Semoga Tuhan Yang Maha Esa menjadikan acara ini bermanfaat bagi kita semua. Baik, Bapak Ibu, memasuki acara yang pertama pada pagi hari ini, kami persilakan kepada yang kami hormati Ibu Ketua Program Studi S2 Kajian Wanita Sekolah Pascasarjana, Ibu Maharani Pertiwi PhD, untuk memberikan sambutan sekaligus membuka secara simbolis kegiatan pada pagi hari ini. Kepada beliau, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Oke, terima kasih Mbak Alfi. Distinguished Professor Benjamin Paula Gonzalez for good morning, Ma'am. Sorry, Ma'am, introduction in
Morning.
Indonesian.
Tidak apa-apa.
Tidak apa ya, Ma'am. Okay. Honorable Graduate School of Universitas Brawijaya members, dear student and respected guests, good morning and warm greeting to all of you. First and foremost, let us express our gratitude to God Almighty for allowing us to gather here today in good health for the official opening of the 3-in-1 program at Program Studi Magister of Gender Studies. It is a great honor for us to welcome Professor Benjamin Paula Gonzalez Flor, who has graciously accepted our invitation to participate in this program. Her presence brings not only a wealth of academic insight, but also enrich our global academic network. In today's academic landscape, social theory and feminist ethics continue to evolve in dynamic and complex ways. Feminist discourse is no longer confined to theoretical discussion. It now holds practical relevance across various domains such as public policy, law, culture, and economics. For this reason, a deep understanding of feminist theory and ethics is essential for student scholars and practitioners working with the social sciences and humanities. However, one of the main challenges in studying feminists in academic setting is the limited access to global perspective and real-world practice. As a response to these challenges, this visiting professor and practitioner program was initiated to strengthen our understanding of social theory and feminist ethics through broader academic collaboration. We hope that through this program, fruitful exchanges of ideas, critical reflection, and meaningful collaboration will flourish, particularly in advancing social awareness and gender justice in our communities. Finally, by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I hereby declare that 3-in-1 program officially open. We wish you a productive and inspiring experience through the program. And once again, we extend our warmest welcome to Professor Benjamin. Thank you so much for accept our invitation. So maybe I would like to introduce a little bit about the Mom Benjamin. Usually I called Professor Benjamin with Mom Benjamin, like my mother. So we meet at the CRK conference, yes, with Mom Benjamin. And Mom Benjamin is very beautiful woman. When I saw her first time, Mom Benjamin's birth in Philippines, right, Mom? And now she is adjunct professor in University of Philippines Los Baños and Philippine Open University. And Mom Benjamin have so many work experience, including in Indonesia. Yeah, Mom Benjamin. So maybe you can introduce and explain about your experiment during stay in Indonesia. So let's we heard about the Mom Benjamin, but I would like to give the time first to the Mbak Alfi to introduce our moderator as well. Thank you, Mbak Alfi.
Ya, terima kasih kepada Ibu Maharani selaku Ketua Program Studi Kajian Wanita di Sekolah Pasca Sarjana Universitas Brawijaya. Baik Bapak Ibu, sebelum beralih pada acara selanjutnya, mohon waktu sejenak untuk kami bisa mendokumentasikan pengambilan foto bersama. Dimohon Bapak dan Ibu dan seluruh peserta dapat mengaktifkan video. Maka kami mohon tim teknis kami untuk bisa meminta bantuan untuk bisa men-screenshot ya pada setiap page-nya ya. Oke, baik, siap ya Bapak dan Ibu. Oke, baik, untuk yang page pertama. Oke, baik, page yang kedua. Baik, page yang ketiga. Baik, Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, memasuki acara inti pada pagi hari ini, langsung saja kami persilahkan kepada narasumber kami, begitu Profesor Benjamina Paula Gonzalez Flor, PhD, untuk memberikan materi perkuliahan yang akan didampingi oleh Ibu Fitri Chandrawardana, PhD, selaku moderator. Selanjutnya, untuk waktu dan kesempatan kami serahkan sepenuhnya kepada Ibu Fitri Chandrawardana, PhD. Kepada beliau kami persilahkan.
Thank you so much, Mbak Alfi. Good morning, Professor Benjamin Paula Gonzalez. Is it our first meeting, Prof?
I think, Ibu. I think it's our first meeting. Have you met me before?
Okay. Oh, no, maybe I
Oh, you missed
mistake with someone else, maybe.
Maybe.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Benjamin. Maybe we will hear a new perspective about feminist, cultural feminist and theory and concept of care, focus on feminism through care from Professor Benjamin. I hope this class will learn new thing and learns something from this class. I think we can directly go to the presentation from Professor Benjamin Paula. Time is yours, Professor.
Salamat Ibu Maharani, salamat Ba Alfie and Ibu Chandra. Let me share my, earlier Ibu Maharani told you that I work in Indonesia. Actually, it's my husband.
Oh.
Bapak saya bekerja di Solo tahun 80 sampai 81 dengan PBB. 11 bulan aja. Jadi saya orang Solo.
Wow.
Tapi tidak bisa ngomong
Jawa.
Jawa
Jawa.
si Titi.
Jawa.
Titi.
Titi.
Wow.
Yeah,
Impressive.
only konversasi ya. My bahasa is only konversasi, not formal bahasa. Maybe I have to learn I have to learn formal bahasa so that I can do the lecture in bahasa. Unfortunately, tidak bisa langsung ya ngomong in bahasa, only konversasi. If you ask me in Indonesian, I can understand and probably get the gist of what you want to get a response from me, but not really in a formal manner. So I could speak, maybe translate some, and maybe if others could help in translation to better appreciate, no, I know you all have this learnings already in you, but you want maybe to hear it from a different voice. That's why you're asking me to share to you my thoughts about what ethics of care is. So let me share my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me share again. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
Yeah.
So formally, let's start the session. So Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Selamat pagi Ibu, Bapak, dan sekalian. Dan terima kasih sudah hadir di sini. No? Thank you for being here this morning. Today, I will be discussing care-focused feminism, particularly how the ethics of care, which was introduced by Carol Gilligan, who challenges the traditional moral theories. And I think that is also the reason why you want to have a different perspective of how we should look at care from different disciplines. As Ibu Maharani earlier articulated in her opening remarks, we have many programs now that would somehow look at care as an essential component of how we practice our profession. And today we will focus on how cultural feminism frames care as a valid and powerful moral paradigm. So let me ask this question. Who among you takes care of people other than yourself? And why? Siapa kamu yang pinduli? Pinduli ya? Other than yourself, and kenapa? Who among you? Any show of hands? Who among you have somebody to take care of
The
that
family.
that you cannot refuse? Bapak?
Yeah, the family.
The family, yes, the family. Yeah, kenapa, Pak?
Yeah, because we are very close. We are taking care of each other. If we are sick, then the family take care of us, and otherwise, vice versa. We also take care of the family. So I think the closest one is the family, then the friends, close friends.
Right. So given a choice, if you were given a choice, are you going to do it or not to do it?
If we are given a choice, we will do it.
We will do it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a very good grounding on how we should look at care from a different perspective. What if we start with morality? No? What if morality begins with relationships? As Bapa articulated, no, shared to us, it's the family, no, the relationships with the family. So we start with that. No? Traditional moral theories, as we all know, they often assume that morality is about rights, it's about duties, it's about rules, yeah. Moralitas adalah tentang hak tugas dan aturan. But no, feminist scholars have asked, what if morality starts with relationships instead? So in this presentation, we will define care ethics as introduced by Gilligan in her book called The Different Voice, and explore how cultural feminism elevates care as a moral and social principle. So the question now is, what is the ethics of care? The ethics of care is a moral theory that emphasizes empathy, compassion, and responsiveness. No? It emphasizes empathy, kasih sayang, dan daya tanggap, rather than focusing on abstract rules or outcomes. It looks at how we care for one another in real-life situations. So we may ask, what do people need? What is my responsibility in this relationship? In the family, you kawin, yeah? You got married. So what will you do with your children? What will you do with your husband? No? So it is our responsibility to take care of our family, to take care the needs of our family. And it goes beyond the family, which we will discuss later. So this concept of ethics of care actually emerged as a critique of male-centered theories like Kantian ethics and utilitarianism. I know you are familiar with this guy. Do you know Immanuel Kant? No? So he talks about deontological ethics. Immanuel based his theory of ethics on duty, universal moral value, laws, and rationality. There is a reason for why we are doing certain behaviors. So the argument is that actions are morally right if they are done from a sense of duty and follow principles that could apply to everyone. So if you think that your action is right, no, it's morally right, and it is your duty to do it, then we go for it. So that is the perspective of Kant. You act only according to rules. No? These rules become universal laws. So what are some universal laws? No? Do not kill. Do not steal. What else? What universal laws are you familiar with? No? We treat people here in the Kantian lens, we treat people as ends in themselves, no? Not merely as means to an end. It's the end in itself. Your action is the end in itself. The moral worth of that action in doing the right thing because it is right, Bitulya, not because of the consequences or emotions, taking place. So for example, telling the truth is always morally required, even if lying would produce outcomes. Because truth-telling is a universal duty. We have to be honest. We have to tell the truth. But sometimes we have white lies. We have white lies. Sometimes we lie. Sometimes we don't tell the truth because we believe that if you do not know, it will not harm you. Maybe something that let's say your father has hypertension or a heart disease. So you could not immediately say, Bapa, your sister died. No? Immediately. So, tidak bisa ngomong langsung, no, like that you, Bapa, what is sister? Saudara niya mati. So you have to take caution, take some care. How will I strategize? No? But it is your moral duty to inform them. Or a family member has, let's say, cancer. Should I tell the patient that she has cancer? It is the right of the patient to know. But the care of how to inform the patient is different from your moral duty. It is not just your obligation, but you have to say it with compassion, with empathy, with responsibility, making sure that the person will not have heart attack or making sure that the person would be able to handle the consequences. What will happen if that person dies at that moment because of your news? If you don't take care. And that is also the reason why our doctors, our nurses, they don't just give the prognosis right there and then, especially if it's malignant. They want everyone to come together, the family and all that, and then decide. So this is how we're going to tell the patient. So it's handle with care. It's like that's the different voice. It's like handling with care. But for Kantian, immediately you will say, you are dying. Maybe 1 bulan, 1 bulan, mati. Just straight away. But for ethics of care, we have to think twice. How are we going to say it so that the person will be able to prepare for the consequences? Another view, the traditional view of ethics of care is what we call utilitarianism, or the consequentialist ethics by John Stuart Mill. So John Stuart Mill was a follower of Jeremy Bentham. I think you are familiar with all these theories in women's studies. And most of his life, Stuart Mill was greatly admired through though he disagreed with some of Bentham's claims, particularly on the nature of happiness. When do you say one is happy? What makes a person happy? From a utilitarianism lens, it judges actions based on their outcomes. The morally right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. And this is also, in many practical aspects like election, for instance. We have our elections concluded on Monday. We had our local elections concluded on Monday. Some were happy, some were not, based on the outcomes, based on the results. But we are thinking of the greater good. Did the winners, chosen by 16 million, 20 million, 30 million people, the best bet for the greatest good? We don't know. But that is how people feel. So we have to respect. They are happy with it. So in this perspective of consequentialist ethics, we look at happiness or pleasure, what we call the hedonistic principle. This is the highest good. So if you are happy, that means it is right. So the consequence of that being happy will only matter if it will determine right or wrong. We voted the wrong people because they bought our votes. But in general, you say that there is impartiality. Everything was equal. We considered everyone's happiness. So everyone must be happy. But of course, that's very ideal. That's very ideal. We always say we cannot make everyone happy. We cannot satisfy everyone's needs or everyone's wants. There is always the extremes. Some are happy, some are not, because happiness is relative. Your outcomes is relative. It depends. It depends on who wants it. So that is the reason why Carol Gilligan, or Nod, this lady, Nell Noddings, one of our feminist theorists, said that caring involves stepping out of one's own personal frame of reference into the others. We have to consider what others feel, not only how you feel. So her contention of also the concept of relationship. How is relationship being nurtured among families, among friends, among members of the community, among justice system, among the academe, among hospital people in the hospital, administrators, nurses, doctors, therapists? They are all part of how we should look at care ethically. So we ask the question, ethics of justice or should be ethics of care? The ethics of justice is really a Western concept, It's a Western philosophy that focuses on our rules, the rights, and fairness as concepts. In contrast, the ethics of care centers on relationships, emotional connection, and contextual thinking. But of course, both justice and ethics have value. But the critique, especially the feminist critique, is that traditional ethics has undervalued care because it is associated with women and private life. We always expect women to take care of children, to clean the house, to wash the clothes, to sitrika the clothes, to clean the yard, to go to the market, no? To teach the children. It's all being seen as a private thing. So we do not take value on how our female counterpart do their share as well. Because there are fathers, no? There are also fathers who take care of their children, who also helps in washing their clothes. But of course, not in all cultures. No? Like Japan, for instance. In Japan, no matter how busy the women are, no, the men are just sitting in front of the television, no, watching news, watching sports. But that is how the culture is. You are not supposed to help in household chores because your responsibility, your duty, no, your duty is to provide food, shelter, no, welfare to the family. So your work is to earn money. I already earned money. So now it's the women's duty, it's the wife's duty to do it by themselves, even if I'm not busy. So I'll just have to wait for my food, even if the baby is crying, even if the dogs are barking, because that is very culture-based. I don't know in Indonesia, do you require your husbands to help in household chores? Can I see a show of hands? Do you ask your husbands to help you clean the house?
Maybe Mbak Fitri, could you answer the questions maybe?
Yes, of course.
They do.
Yes.
So Bapak Faisal also helps in household chores.
I think there has been changing a lot in Indonesia. It was like very human, women so much in the back in the household things, but I think right now it's more men's also involving in the housekeeping things when needed. So I think it's been changed. What the way I see in comparison like in the past, but and the more and more I think equality in terms of taking care of the housing, of doing the houseworks. I
Yeah, that's
think.
very
But
good to hear.
if the question is to me, yes, I do if I have time.
Okay. If you have time, no? But
If I'm available, let's put it that way.
if you're available. Yeah, because like we look at it as no, traditionally we look at it as unfair, no? Unfair for
Yeah.
women because women also work, but they are also expected to do household chores. No? How come men, they also work, but they are not expected to do household chores? Because that was the traditional view. But as you said, Faisal, this is changing. And I think that is a very, it's a very welcome change, you know, welcome behavior, social change without even nudging, no, without laws, without ordinance, no. People just thought, okay, I will change. Maybe I will share more of those anecdotes in the second half of the presentation because I have many stories about these changes, no, in society. Even in my own family, we have experienced that. So we should look at ethics of care, no? We should look at ethics of care as something that is more relational, no? It's not a duty, but it's more of a responsibility, no? Something that you went into it. And that is why Carol Gilligan would look at it from a different voice, no? Carol Gilligan, I know you're familiar with her, in her book, no? In 1982, she has this book on In a Different Voice. And this book challenged Kohlberg's theory that moral development stops or ends, culminates in abstract reasoning. She argued that this model was based on male subjects and overlook, how many women approach morality through connection and care, through relationships and care. And that, she proposed, that care is not inferior to justice. No, it's just different and equally valid to make it fair. So being a mom, being a pambanto at the same time, is just being fair because we're doing it because of compassion, because of empathy, because of responsibility that we have to take care of in relation to the people around us. So if you are a community worker, you are a social worker, the people around you, you care for them because that is your work. So your passion, your putting yourselves into their shoes, or you call empathy, is something inherent to the profession. So we don't look at it because it is a duty, but because we want to do it because of the relationships that we have to nurture and build. So in her book, Gilligan also challenges the male-dominated models of moral development, like Kohlberg's, that applies the principles of justice, rights, and individual autonomy. We always say that no man is an island. You cannot live alone. You always have somebody with you, whether this is a mother, a father, siblings, or maybe a pachar, or maybe friend, no, teman-teman. You always have somebody to talk to. So Gilligan argued that these frameworks of Kohlberg's failed to recognize how many women reason morally through a lens of care, responsibility, and relationship rather than detached rules. So she claims that women are not morally deficient or underdeveloped, as suggested by Kohlberg, but instead speak in a different voice, one that values empathy, contextual judgment, and responsiveness to others' need. So we should not take in isolation why we help the family, why we help others, because these are all relational. So rather than focusing on resolving moral dilemmas through rules, the ethic of care try to ask questions like, who is involved? What do they need? How do we preserve relationships and prevent harm? So Gilligan does not argue that care is exclusive to women, but that it has been systematically overlooked because it is often more associated with the feminine and the private sphere. She urges for moral theories that integrate care and justice that would reflect the full range of human experience. So in other words, she is not saying that it's only women who cares or who care, because men also care a lot, especially for their women, for their families, for their friends, for their associates. But because caring, loving, being compassionate, these are all motherly, women characteristics or traits or features. But we also say lovable husband, or loving husband. We always say that. But it's not related to, let's say, loving because he helps me in my household chores. Loving because he washes the dishes. Loving because he feeds the dog. But because of the relationship within the family. So if you are married, you cannot say that you are bound, no? That you are in prison, that you are that it is your duty to do all these things. But of course, even the Quran, no? If I may recall my Islam lessons before, it's really about women's role in nurturing the child. No? I did a study in Pakistan sometime I think it was in 2013 or 2014 was it. So it's about open distance education. So we tried to understand why women are not in school. Because they said that the Quran provides or prescribes that women's role is to take care of their children. Women's role is to nurture the children. So in Gilligan, it is not simply a role. It is compassion. It is responsiveness to your context. So as a mom, you are expected, no, to do those tasks. So it is not something to be ashamed of. It is something actually to be proud of. That's why we have Mother's Day. No, we had do you celebrate Mother's Day? Ibu Hari, do you have that? So for
We
Mother's
have Mother's
Day,
Day in Indonesia. Yeah.
you, okay. Bapak,
22nd of December.
Oh, different. Ours is based on the American calendar. We had it on May 10. May 10 is Mother's Day. Father's Day is the second Sunday of June. So during Mother's Day, we celebrate. We have party, small party. We have bouquets of flowers. We give gifts to mothers, to appreciate, to show their appreciation of that kind of relationship. Because we always believe that it is always the mother who takes the burden in the family.
Mm.
We forget that there are also husbands. Husbands who do not work, but they do the work at home. They do the cooking, they do the grocery, they take care of the children because the wife works abroad. And that is one of the peculiar setup now in the Philippines, because many of our overseas Filipino workers are women. So they work abroad. They are in Abu Dhabi, in the Middle East usually. They are in Taiwan or in Hong Kong or Singapore, doing maybe domestic work or maybe a professional work, But the point is they go abroad. So who will take care of the children? So it's the husband who will take care of the children. So we call them husbands. So let's try to compare the different elements of focus, core values, and how do we make decision in these three categories. So in Kantian lens, Immanuel Kant, the focus is on duty, or it's a universal law that we should all follow. So the core value is, so it's anchored on rationality and the economy. The decision is, what are the intentions? What are the rules and regulations? So we have to follow those. From utilitarian, Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, the focus is on the consequences of your actions, like happiness. So if you are happy, you are right. So the core value rests on the greater good, maximum well-being. And this is being done because the outcome of being happy is good for everyone, outcomes for all. For care of ethics as a theory, the focus is on relationships and What is the context of relationships? How are we related? Why should I take care? No? Why should I take care of you? What kind of relationship do we have? May this be familiar relationship? May this be from professional relationships? So that is how ethics of care is being looked at from a feministic lens. So our core value is empathy, responsibility, compassion. No? And we do this because we take into account the needs and human connection. Especially now with information technology, the more we are in I think, a better position, no, in the best position to show such kind of relationships in terms of ethics of care, even if we are computer mediated, no? Even if we are distance away from each other, we can show connection, our affection. We did a study, again, we did a nationwide evaluation of the free Wi-Fi for all by the United Nations Development Program and our Department of Information and Communication Technology. And what was the most significant change when we had this free Wi-Fi? No, we went to indigenous peoples communities, no, the Gidas, no, we call them geographically isolated, disadvantaged areas where really people are poor, people do not have access to information. And the most significant change that we saw in those focus group discussion was connection, connectivity. So we could connect with people, we could connect with our family members who live abroad, could connect with people living in another island province. Because the Philippines, like Indonesia, but not as big as Indonesia, maybe only 1/10 of Indonesia. They live in Luzon, and these people, we were in the Visayas. So it will either you take a boat or you take the plane to get to these places. But with free Wi-Fi, just one click of a button, you can immediately connect because of that relationship, because of that context that we are a family. So as a family, we have to take care of the needs, whether this need will be social, economic, emotional, maybe financial as well. Well, some said that they could send money to me. I could tell them that I ran out of money. I need my allowance now, so send it to me now. So connectivity is something that we really have to value, given the changing communication landscape of the world. So it all boils down to cultural feminism and care. So what is cultural feminism? Cultural feminism values traits traditionally linked with women, like taking care of children, nurturing children, empathizing with others, your EI, your emotional intelligence. So we look at this as very cultural, very feminine. We look at it as weaknesses. We always look at women as the weaker sex. I think in any culture, but of course not in the Americas. In the United States, they look at everyone as equal. But still, there are indicators, there are signs that really women are seen as the weaker sex. And that is why these characteristics are not shown by men. Otherwise, they will be seen as soft as well. But in Thailand, Thai are very soft-spoken. Who've been to Thailand? Sawadee ka. Kapkunaka. The way it's like solo, no? It's like Jawa, very halus, no? Very halus the way they speak. But I think in Thailand, it's because of what they call kringchai. So Kenchay means it's consideration. So they consider anyone, no, in different contexts. So even if you're a foreigner, even if you are a national, you always have that cultural trait of considering, you know, the context where you are in. And I think that's a very good characteristic that would welcome anyone in Thailand. And probably that maybe because, or that is also the reason why they call it the land of smiles. Or also the Philippines, Indonesia, we all smile a lot, no? But maybe not as much as Thais do. Care should be the foundation of moral education, even political ethics. Even Ibu Maharani mentioned earlier that law, no, is one of the applications of ethics of care. So Nell Noddings, no, is and Virginia Held, they argue that care should be the foundation of moral education and political ethics. And this perspective reclaims and revalues what has been socially feminized. So the more soft-spoken you are, the more you can empathize, the more that you are emotionally intelligent, the more ganting, the more handsome you are. If you could exude these characteristics. But again, patriarchalism, will always come in. Would Indonesians be soft-spoken? Maybe it will seen as, being less male, less macho, no? In the Philippines, we call them macho, no? Machismo. So we tend to consider, where we are. And that is the point of Gilligan. You have to look at the context. No? Why are Thais very soft-spoken? Because of their cultural trait of Krengchai. That is their culture. We cannot argue with that. And probably women in Thailand are very happy because maybe, I don't know, I haven't studied the culture of Thailand really in depth. But I could sense that there is some kind of equality. And that is what also the king wants. But some countries, neighboring countries in the Mekong region, like let's say Lao PDR, they're very patriarchal. Even the show of the temples, these are phallic symbols that would show that man is the leader of the land. The temples, the temples have pointed tips. Those are phallic symbols that show machismo, that show a patriarchal leadership, meaning it's the men who leads the family. I'm the head. I even had, I worked also in Lao PDR for quite a while. I've been there since 2005 until I think 2013. So my work there was about education, Ministry of Education, Pendidikan. So I had many friends in Lao, and some of these friends, they said that because she belongs to a indigenous group, the Hmong tribe, Hmong. The Hmong is the most educated tribe in Lao PDR. And she said, it's okay to have several wives. Because the Hmong, they could have several wives, like Muslims. They could have several wives. Because to her, if you are the head, if you are the first wife, I don't know in the Muslim culture, as the first wife, you schedule. Okay, where will my husband sleep tonight? No, they usually live in one big house, like 3 floors house, big house. So I will put the sarong, the malong in the room where my husband will sleep. I will also assign my wife, or the wives, who will take care of the children, who will wash the dishes, who will bring the children to school. And so she said, it's okay for me to have several wives because I will have several pambantu also. I will have several maids to take care of the things in the house. So it doesn't really matter. So again, context. No? I care for them, but they should also care for the family because that is their responsibility. It's not a duty. It's something that they need to do. Care is not the opposite of justice, but it is the foundation of justice. These challenges, a common but sometimes misleading way of thinking about ethics. Care is not the opposite of justice. It is its foundation. The idea that care and justice are opposing or mutually exclusive principles should not be done. It argues, the argument is that true justice depends on care. When a judge, gives a decision, very carefully, you have to consider so many things before you give a verdict or a decision, for death sentence or life imprisonment. Very careful. Well, of course, in Western philosophy, justice is often seen, as rational, very objective, and focus on fairness, because they apply the rules, equally to everyone. In contrast, care is associated with emotion, relationships, especially needs. And some argue that these two are separate ways of making moral decisions. How do we decide? For ethics as justice, we look at impartiality, rules, rights, or fairness. But in care ethics, we look at empathy, compassion, attention to individual needs. So these are our decision points. These are the things that we consider before making a moral decision. It requires seeing people as fully human. Humans with needs, they have needs, they have vulnerabilities, and they have dignity. And so, if we apply justice without care, it can become cold or blind, or enforcing rules without compassion or context. Caring, on the other hand, motivates us to want justice in the first place. We seek justice because we care about the others being harmed, excluded, or treated unfairly. Therefore, a justice system built on care ensures that the laws and structures are designed with real human beings in mind, not just idealized citizens. So sometimes, in practice, how do you do this? Let's say in criminal justice, without care, it may prioritize punishment over rehabilitation or fairness. In healthcare, justice requires equal access, but care ensures people are treated with dignity and humanity. Especially in our hospitals, government hospitals, we don't, especially if patients are poor, medical professionals sometimes they favor the rich patients. If you are poor, you wait for an available room. But if you are a VIP, you get the best room. Or in terms of social policy, fair distribution or justice must be informed by understanding people's needs. So in short, we could say that justice without care can become harsh and inhumane. Care without justice can become partial or unstructured. but care that is grounded with justice in empathy ensures that fairness is applied in a way what truly honors human dignity. So rather than being opposites, care and justice work together. And care is the starting point or the foundation for any just society. So if the country does not care, there is no justice. Again, Thailand is an example. In a monarchy, the king's words, the king's instructions, they are laws. So if you have a king that is truly caring for the people, the country will be very progressive. And that probably is also the reason why Thailand was never conquered. It was never conquered. They have no debts, no utang in ADB, no utang in World Bank. They could thrive on their own because of the ideology that they have. So we could say that true justice cannot exist without care, because it is care that drives us to seek justice in the first place. We care. That is why we have to make sure that justice is served. Okay, let's go to the applications. Earlier, Ibu Maharani mentioned some of the fields that we could really operationalize care. Nursing profession, medicine, social work, education, parenting even, women's studies, law, of course, my field, development communication. I was even telling my colleagues, I said, I think this is one course that we should include in our curriculum. Because in development communication, we assert that development communication started in the Philippines, which is true, because the term development communication was coined by Dr. Nora C. Cabral, who started development communication in the Philippines, actually in the world. So anyone who has development communication should refer to UP Los Baños DevCom style. So we always emphasize that in the program, we should empathize with people, we should be compassionate about what we're doing, we should be passionate about what we're doing, but never did we mention the word care. Although in thesis, we have caring communication, small of palliative care in nursing, for instance. And I'm very thankful that Ibu Maharani invited me to talk about the ethics of care, because this is something that we do, but we do not articulate well in the curriculum. And so I also congratulate the graduate school of UB, because this is something that you are trying to promote in Indonesia as mentioned by Faisal, times have changed. You can now tell your husband to do this, to do that. Unlike before, which is also, Indonesia is very patriarchal. So care ethics or ethics of care has real world relevance. This is very crucial in this following work. And I believe that it also informs policy debates about parental leave, child care, even elder care. These are some areas that we should be more attentive and be more conscious about how we do our work in women's studies. So what kind of skills do you need to be equipped with? Right now, I'm proposing in DevCom to have an ethics of care. an ethics of care course, or maybe not a course, or maybe just a topic that should be embedded in some of the courses in development communication, so that we could emphasize that we care for others, not because we want to meddle into their lives, but because we care for them. So I think that's a very good strategy on social behavior change. It's something that we have not explored, and thank you, Ibu Maharani, for bringing me into this. I have also articulated this in UNICEF. Last Thursday, I had a research advisory group meeting with UNICEF in terms of social behavior change. And again, I said, care is something that we need to consider in trying to contextualize why people behave the way they do. So if we care for them, then maybe our nudging, maybe our interventions would, ring a bell. Maybe they would remember. Maybe they would feel good. Why they want to do it? Because they know that there is love in doing those kinds of interventions. Well, the focus was immunization. So we love the children. No? The children or the youth is the hope. Well, we always say that in the Philippines, the hope of the fatherland, because they will become the future leaders. So if we cannot show care when they are children, how can they care for others when they have not felt it themselves? So it has to start from within. It has to start from the home. What kind of relationships do you have in the home? That's why parenting is really one of the areas that we should be very careful in terms of how we rear our children, how we make sure that they care for themselves, they care for their families, they care for others. Well, in UP, there is one survey about morality. So one of the questions was, do you think the community is your moral obligation? So I had to think twice. Is the community my moral obligation? Because in UP, one of the values that we espouse is public service. So that means it is a moral obligation. So if you're a graduate of UP, that means you have to take care of the people around you. It's a tall order, but I think it makes sense because it's not only a value of the university, but a personal value as well. So if it becomes a societal value, the more we will have a happy society, like Bhutan. In Bhutan, their measure of development is happiness. If you are happy, then you are developed. But what makes you happy? So it all boils down to the other indicators. You have to have money, you have to have house, you have to have food, you have to have children, but they don't look at it from that perspective. They look at it from an emotional lens. So happiness as an indicator is not as, maybe as bad as saying that economic growth would be or GDP or GDP, gross domestic product, will not be our indicator, but an index of how happy my people are. That's in Bhutan. So when care is recognized as a public good, not just private labor, it can reshape how we think about justice, equality, and human needs. But of course, it's not always the happy side of the coin. No, we always say that there will be critique, there will be oppositors, there will be other views about care ethics. So they suggest that women are naturally suited for care. So this is essential for women. That only women should be naturally suited for care. Others say it may not scale well to legal systems or broad justice issues. But again, now that the landscape is changing, it has degendered, no, these roles. Feminist theories respond by emphasizing that care must be inclusive, must be political, and degendered. And this is something that all of us must be able to engage in. So the argument of feminists, no, it must be inclusive, political, and degendered. So ethics of care is not gendered, or it's not based on gender roles. So feminist theorists say, I already said it, care must be inclusive, political, and degendered, and everyone should be engaged in it. So why is care matters, or why does care matter in feminism? Because care-focused feminism is a radically different moral framework. Instead of rules or outcomes, it starts with relationships. It starts with human connection. Cultural feminism encourages us to see care not as passive or private, but as a powerful relational ethic that could shape everything from personal relationships to public institutions. I think that's something that cannot be argued. So in a nutshell, we could say that ethics of care means being kind, helpful, no? If I am going to tell a 5-year-old what is ethics of care, this is what I'm going to say. Ethics of care means being kind, helpful, and loving to people, especially when they need you. It's like when someone is sad and you give them a hug, and when you help a friend tie their shoe. It is about thinking, how can I take care of others? And not just what is fair for everyone. We do our best to take care of people we love, like family, friends, or even a pet. Intinya, let me read this in Indonesian. Etika kepedulian berarti bersikap baik, membantu, dan penuh kasih kepada orang lain, terutama ketika mereka membutuhkan kita. Ini seperti saat seseorang merasa sedih dan kita memberinya pelukan, atau ketika kita membantu teman mengikat tali sepatunya. Etika ini mengajarkan kita untuk berpikir bagaimana saya bisa merawat atau memperhatikan orang lain, dan bukan hanya apa yang adil untuk semua orang. Kita berusaha sebaik mungkin untuk merawat orang-orang yang kita cinta, seperti keluarga, teman, atau bahkan hewan peliharaan. Ada jawaban? Do you have questions?
There is a question in chat of Professor Benjamin from Mrs. Ika Waidan. Can I open discussion now?
Yes, I will just close my presentation with this last words. Let's talk with care. Banyak terima kasih.
Professor Benjamin. Okay. Now we will open a question and answer session. And I will read the Mrs. Ika question. This is about the Carol Gilligan opinions that say women in general tend to see ethical issues through the lens of relationship and responsibilities towards others, not just through the impersonal principle of justice. From this opinion, I feel that we are compelled not to hurt others, not because of the moral rule of do not hurt, but because we care about them as a relationship, so as to make their suffering meaningful to us. And she asked if there's any Professor Benjamin view on Carol opinions. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. That is very true, no? We are compelled not to hurt others, not because of the moral rule of do not hurt, but because we care about them as our relationship to us, to make their suffering meaningful to us. It's being a saint in a way, no? Being a saint in a way, because sometimes if we do not want to rock the boat, so to speak, we should just, either attack it head on, or just keep quiet, no? But sometimes we also cannot always keep our mouth shut, especially if we know that we are on the right, no? But that is also relationships, especially in professional relationships. So in professional relationship, we can speak our minds, and this mind will not affect our relationship as colleagues, supposedly. But of course, there are others who would look at it differently. So if you do not look at care as your context, you might be seen as a villain, or somebody who is always an oppositor. I agree.
Thank you so much. Is there any question?
Ibu, may I have a question? Or
Yes,
Please,
Pa.
Mr. President.
yeah, Professor Gonzalez, thank you for a very insightful and interesting presentation and discussions. I think it is very, very valid issues that we are facing globally, especially maybe in the Asia, where I think the perceptions of women is more like more like house things doing. But if I see things happen in a company, multinational companies where I'm doing right now, where we don't see differentiation of genders, whether men or women, we encourage more women's leadership to go up in the leadership roles, because we don't see the difference. I mean, it's just equal, it's just the same, because we see from what they can do for the roles that are having, rather than based on the genders. So then the environment is creating, then people are really growing up. So what I see is more, we leave the culture, let's say in maybe some Muslim countries, they leave the cultures that they believe that human is just doing house things. Actually, it's not really, the way I say, it's not really religion says so, because in the Muslim context, there is no difference between you woman, men or women. They are the same in the eyes of God. They are the same. It depends on what good things you are doing, what the good deeds that you are doing. That's what matters in the eyes of God. It's not just because of you women, then you are lower class or different class. So I think it's more about perceptions. It's more about it's culture that growing, rather than is really positioning ourselves on what we are capable of. So then this is the directions where we are going, because we are having the same capability. We are not different in general sense. Of course, there are some differences, but in general, in terms of capability, it's not different. So then you see the equality. Is a clear example nowadays in the companies, multinational companies, in ADB or in any multinational, they don't see genders for the reason for people doing or not doing. So how you see that on those situations?
Yeah, because it is an international company. So you would be, you will be maybe frowned upon if you do inequality, since this is something that everyone is worried about. So we always say that there is gender equality in hiring, in recruitment, in the relationships within the organization, which is good, no? Which is good. But of course, we could not factor out that there are groups somehow who will have their own set of rules, no, in terms of relationships. But in an organization, if there are provisions like this, and mostly in UN agencies, there are provisions of equal respect, equal opportunities, no, equal treatment, no. It doesn't have to be a male or a female who's gonna apply in the position, especially now that they have what they call a quantum, no? It's a quantum database where you apply, where you put your CV in, and then it's the computer who will select who will be chosen. So it's not the company who can choose. Well, this is in UN. So it's the database that will choose because of the credentials. Not because of gender, not because of nationality, but because of the credentials of that particular person. And in companies who observe such kind of equality, that is something that is ideal and should be emulated by others. So I think that's a very good practice in terms of organizational communication, where there is no genders or cultural sensitivities.
Bias.
Yeah. Because it's
No, and one last, I like what you say. The charis is the foundations of justice. That's I agree so much on that. Rather than the opposite, it is a foundation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pa.
Thank you.
And that example came from Pakistan. No, it's a study that I did in Pakistan about them not going to school, physical school, but they do homeschooling, because they said that their role, as stated in the Quran, is to take care of their children. So they have to be schooled by themselves before they could teach others. So I thought it's part of...
There is no such in the Quran citing that the woman, they don't go to school. I think it's more about perceptions, combination about the culture that they've been living.
Maybe more of the
There is
interpretation.
no such. There is no
They
such.
go to school. They go to school, but not the face-to-face school. They are nurtured at home. They learn at home, because their role is to teach their children. So what can they teach if they do not know what to teach? So they are in school, but they are not in physical conventional schools. That's why their enrollment is like 40 million, 30 million, no? In Allama Iqbal Open University.
All right, thank you.
Any other jawaban?
Silakan jika ada yang
Any
mau
other
bertanya.
pertanyaan?
Yes,
Prof, not
Ibu
any
Fitri.
other jawaban is answer. If you ask any other
Bertanyaan. Sorry, bertanyaan. Ibu Fitri?
Mungkin dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan jika ada yang mau bertanya.
Sedikit translate Ibu ya.
Ya.
Makasih.
Dari Mbak Herlina, silahkan Mbak Herlina. Mbak Herlina.
Yes, Bu Maharani. Hello, Mrs. Benjamin.
Hi.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry I cannot turn on my camera. I have trouble here.
It's okay.
Okay, well.
I cannot see your beautiful face.
Okay, then I will let you to stick on my picture. Okay. Yes, I note some what quote from you. I do believe that we should talk in care language nowadays, particularly amid violence everywhere, war, and especially in the context of Indonesia. But I want to I want to counter Mr. Faisal statement about he doesn't see about the inequality. I want to jump into a rural context because that is my concern. Especially, I just did my research in rural communities, particularly in Javanese context in Central Java. Well, patriarchy still exists until now, and it's what legitimized by religion narrative. So kiai or ustad in the local community even doing pembenaran, doing legitimize that woman is obligated in home, woman is obligated at children care, even when a husband or man helping the household chores, they use the diction help, not doing. So my husband helping me cooking, not doing. I mean, the diction helping state that doing the homework is not the man's job, right? Just as assistant, like that. The reality I picture in the context of rural community in Central Java.
Yeah.
So I guess it's maybe silly question, but I really want to ask you why the nation or why the system until now do not buy the care. I mean, why we still follow what capitalism? What we still follow what benefit most, not what we need from us, for all of us, right? That
Yeah.
yes,
The challenge. That is the challenge for
yeah.
your program. No, that is the challenge for women's studies. That is the challenge for development communication. How
Yeah.
can we change that behavior? No, how can we change that behavior? And as you said, it's basically cultural. No. So how do we now approach cultural sensitivities that will somehow still be observed, but there will be changes in the operation. And that is the challenge. That is also the challenge in DevCom. No? We cannot just change people's culture. It will take a while. It takes a lot of education. It takes a lot of awareness. It takes a lot of consideration to accept certain interventions. So it has been, a patriarchal society has been there for so long, and not one theorist can just change it overnight. Feminism cannot just change it overnight. But as Faisal said, it's slowly, it's slowly changing. It did not change totally. Slowly changing. There are now signs, there are now events, there are now indicators that this kind of caring or this kind of looking at care as obligation, as duty, is now changing because it's now more of shared parenting, or shared responsibility. But in rural areas, I'm sure it will take maybe 100 more years to change such kind of perception, especially if there are no interventions being offered to them. They have no choice. This is how they live. But maybe if our social workers, maybe if our local government unit, maybe if our, how do you call the village head?
Kepala desa.
Kepala desa, lurah.
Kepala desa, Pak Lurah, maybe if it will start from them, there should be champions, There should be takers. There should be somebody who will really promote it, no? Somebody that they respect, somebody that they look up to, so that it becomes the norm, no?
Yeah,
Instead of outright change in behavior, it will not happen.
yeah,
But if you try to transform how they perceive it, maybe by showing examples, maybe if they see it from the top, maybe if they see it from a national government, then it may cascade, no? It may trickle down to the communities, but maybe slowly. Yes, Ibu
Yeah.
Herlina.
yeah. Can I add more
Yes.
about cultural what dimension? Well, in the context of Indonesia, actually, we have the spirit of togetherness, kindness. We call it gotong royong,
Yes,
solidarity.
gotong royong.
Even in the context of well, I will name the village, Kendal-Rejo village in Central Java in Pemalang. The solidarity they have is very strong, even the kepala desa. But when the kepala desa or the other stakeholder translate into, for example, program intervention or policy, they do not use the care ethic, use the sense of solidarity. Yeah, it's like a paradox.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe the others can
Because
join
it
our
cannot
discussion.
happen. It cannot happen overnight. So you have to do it again. Usually when we train, we have different people attending. And then they go back to their workstation. And then they resign. And then people change. And then new kepala desa. So new people again. So you have to train again. So we should not be tired training, no, the new or the incumbent, because the incumbent would be able to somehow be the vehicle of this change. But if we only depend on one training, we could not say that I have already trained them. How come they're not changing? No, because we have changed the trainee. So no more champions in the area. So we have to train again. We have to monitor. We have to check, oh, where is these people trained? What happened? What should we do next? What indicators are we going to measure so that we know that these changes are occurring? And usually if it's culture, we always say, keep an open mind. So remember that. Keep an open mind, especially if we talk about culture. We cannot change culture overnight. So it's really a struggle, no, for social workers, for women development workers to change behaviors because it is culture bound. We have to change the culture first, which is quite impossible in the short term. But perhaps eventually, if we are so passionate about what we're doing, then maybe we will be able to see trickles of change. It may not be 100% change. If you could change your tetangga, neighbor, yeah? If you could change your tetangga and the neighbor of that tetangga will also be able to change, then it will trickle, no? Cascade bit by bit. And perhaps eventually after 50 years, we'll be able to see some dent, no, in the culture of change. Like now, I had a class in communication landscape for ASEAN media. So I asked them, okay, look for 100 respondents from each ASEAN country. And then look at how they talk about their culture. So it's cultural narratives through social media. And the results they were very interesting. They said that they don't actually talk about their culture in social media, but some countries they do. They like Vietnam, they talk about their culture, and somehow it gives us an idea on how we should approach them. So with technology, with information and communication technology or these digital platforms, little by little, maybe we could nudge such kind of change. Maybe you could come up with infographics, or maybe some orientation or webinar, or maybe a program supported by your local government unit on how we look at our responsibility, differently from what we now practice. Maybe only. Not tanto, not tanto. But if you work it out, little by little, and your study, Bu Arlina, I think would be a very good input to our policymakers, because this is something that we want to promote, in women's studies. So if our research results remain in our libraries, remain in our journal articles published in reputable journals, Web of Science or Scopus, only those people reading those materials will learn from it. So you have to bring it down to policy making. Tell your stories to your local government officials. What can we do about this? In our sector, we want to look at care equally. We want to look at care as being the responsibility of both men and women. It's not a gendered role, but a shared role that all humanity must be able to perform.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bu. Put that in your recommendation.
Yes. Well, although it is not easy in the context of Indonesia for
Congratulations.
just nobody to say recommendation to a stakeholder, but I will try. We should.
Because you could show them, or say, open a window to the world. It's not isolated. They are connected. No, we always look at the country as a system. So they do not exist alone. There is a national government, a regional, a provincial, a village. What is the smallest unit? A DESA, right?
Yes, DESA.
So there is this very tall order of hierarchy in Indonesia. To think that Indonesia is like what? 700,000 islands. No? So wide.
17,000 plus 17,000.
17,000. So 17,000. So imagine this small island that cannot be reached by technology, maybe, or by any intervention. So they will live like they have lived before, because there is nothing new. Nobody comes to them. And there are areas like that, especially in the Pacifics. In the Pacific Island, there are communities that they are the first visitors. No technology has been there. They are not connected still. So we can, even maybe in the Philippines, maybe we still have areas that are very far from the cities, and we cannot be 100%. But we say that we have this philosophy that if you have affected 15% of the population, then that would be a very good percentage of change going to happen if we could target that much. But Indonesia is like how much? 254 million? 250? How many?
Around
270.
270. That's 270 million. So 15% of that. If you could change 15 for 15, yeah? What's 15 in Indonesia? 15. 15% be able to change. Then that would be a good number already. That would be a good target already. Because that means there will be a good dispersion, especially in social media platforms. We say that you have 6 friends. Let's say you have 6 friends in social media, and then that 6 friend will also have 6 friends. How many would that be? So the multiplier effect will probably have a dent, will have some sense in terms of promoting these interventions. But of course, it could not be limited to one platform only. There should be several platforms of communication with them, no, to achieve behavior change, to achieve changing the norms, to transform them. We call it transformative communication. And it takes a lot of work, social mobilization, IEC, so many, so many approaches, not just one. Social media, legacy media, and it has to be systems-based. It has to be supported by champions, advocacy. So the Kipala DESA head, they should be at the forefront of those interventions. You cannot do it alone, or one ministry cannot do it alone. It has to be supported by BAPENAS, that's supported by Ministry Pendidikan. They have to work together to make it happen.
Okay, another question from Mrs. Ika, Prof. Jamin. There is a question about the migrant woman of Filipino. She asked about what about a migrant woman who have to leave their homes and then hand over all caregiving duties to their man or husband? Are all these men able to carry out caregiving duties? Or are there many challenges like in Indonesia? Because in Indonesia there are so many ultimately harm to women.
Yeah. Oh, banyak challenge. Yeah, banyak challenges. If the wife Estrella pergi ke OFW, ke bekerja keluar what's nation?
Malaysia.
Luar negeri, yeah. Many challenges, of course. But in the Philippines, we have, like Indonesia, we have extended families. So they have their aunties, they have their grandma, they have their grandpa, uncles, living with them. And secret is pambantu. So you have money, so you have pambantu. So the pambantu will help, Pambantu will help. So it's not really a sole, it's not just the sole husband who will work. But some houses, of course, they do not have maids. So the husband will have to do the work as well. But there are families, parents perhaps, would help them do the job. Because it's a family affair, sort of. Especially if they live close to each other. But some of the challenges, they get another history, they break families. These are some realities, but not 100%. There are, again, with social media, you could call your, and it's for free, for Messenger, or WhatsApp, you could call them anytime, even in the evening, anytime, if you have time to call them. So you could do video call, It's really connectivity. It's really connection. That relationship you have to nurture even at a distance. So distance relationships, you have to understand that this is our only option. We do not have a good opportunities back home. So we have to make sure that we agree that this is our solution. So we respect our solution. We agreed on it. So I think we cannot guarantee that there will be a 100% emotional intelligence, especially if there are temptations, if there are other beautiful women in the area. But of course, there are also beautiful men in Kiluar Negri. So it's a balance. If you do that, I can do that. But I think that's not it's not how women, it's not how women rationalize. Because women are sometimes more emotional rather than rational. So if you take another husband, or if you take another wife, I could not say, I will take another husband. It's not easy for women to do that. But for men, maybe that's easy for men. Because it's their nature. But for women, it may take a while. Women become the, no, the partner who will suffer more emotionally.
Does that answer the question, Mrs. Ika?
But we have rules, we have rules like if you are not married, you cannot own any of the properties. So even if you got married abroad or you married another, you cannot own properties by law. So it's only the legal wife who can own everything. But the children of the second family could be considered as one part, of the share. So, pamanya, I have 3 children, and then I have 1 child, or I have also 3 children in the other S3. I have now 6. So if I divide my wealth, if I die, it will be divided among my wife, my 3 children, so that's 4, and my 3 children and the other wife would only be equivalent to 1 child. So only 5 will share the wealth. So there's no point doing it.
So the migrant women need a support system, especially basically from their family. Thank you, Professor Benjamin. And then this is another question from Mrs. Ika. Mrs. Ika, question is about how to see the various cases of gender inequality, especially in the mining industry globally, where the industry is synonymous with masculinity. Is there
Yeah,
interesting
in the
challenge?
Philippines, we also do not have studies about the mining industry where women are involved. But in some areas, like let's say that's in Bicol, Jose Panganiban, it's a barangay in Bicol. Bicol is like how many kilometers from Manila? Southern part of Manila, further from Laguna. I live in Laguna. We have women who are in the mining industry, but this mining industry is a small mining industry because the area is rich in gold. So you could just span gold in seas or rivers. You could just go there and then get some of these stones, and they're really made of gold. So you have to have it processed. This is one area, and many women are into it. It's not really a big mining industry like we have, big trucks and all that. And we also do not have a study on that. Because here in that particular study, where we tried to develop a micro-credential for the IPs, the indigenous peoples of that group. So this group, we call them the Manide group. We tried to come up with a curriculum that would preserve their culture. Because right now, they're into social media, and some children, they cannot speak the language anymore because they're into YouTube. So we tried to come up with a micro-credential course for the Manides themselves, for the Manides themselves about understanding the self. So one of their occupations is mining. But we did not go into mining per se. It's just part of their daily routine. When they go to the sea, they pan the sea, they pan the river, and then they get these stones with gold. So they bring it to a mining, a metal, what do you call, the goldsmith, so that the goldsmith would be able to get the gold from the stones. Yeah, I think it's an interesting study also, especially in areas where there is environmental degradation. But again, you are here facing big multinational companies from Australia, from Japan, from the United States. They're all here, from China. They're all here because, you know, the Philippines is so rich in these natural resources, and probably we do not have the capacity, or maybe the infrastructure, or maybe this is not something that our 11 rich families in the Philippines are interested in. No? They are more into IT, more on medicine, more on alcohol and soft drinks, more on food, no, food chains, rather than a very controversial, no, because it's not easy to get an environmental certificate, environmental ECC, call it environmental compliance certificate. It's not easy, but these women in Jose Panganiban, they just pick it out from the river, from the sea. So there's no certificate required. So they just go to the goldsmith and then bring the stones to those shops. And then they have money.
Professor Gonzalez,
Yes, pa.
if I may add on this point, I have seen a gold mining site in North Sumatra, where most of the heavy truck drivers, I would say 50% of them are women.
Oh, really?
Yes, I've witnessed by myself. It came to my surprise back then, where every time I saw the big trucks came in with the stones, and then the drivers were women.
Wow.
It will surprise me, but it's real.
Yeah, it's happening. So
Yeah.
that Ibu is one area probably that you could study. Why are they into mining, and how do they perceive their work? Yeah, that would be very interesting. Our work now are no longer like in the Philippines. We have jeepney drivers who are women. Our jeepney is equivalent to your angkuta.
Yeah.
So we have women drivers. We have your tuk-tuk. How do you call the tuk-tuk in Thailand? In Indonesia, you also have it.
We
It's not
call it bajai for Indonesia.
bajai. We have women drivers. We also have women engineers. We also have, I think, mechanics, women mechanics. Women now, you know, they engage in work that men are engaged in, and it's not seen as being a competitor. Or maybe because the Philippines is not very gender sensitive.
Yeah.
We're more, we promote actually inclusive, no? Inclusive professions. So we do not really marginalize men or women in a particular position or rank. But of course, in many companies, there are men or women heads. We cannot say that it's just the men who become CEO, but there are also women leaders, and they find it very elating. They are really happy that they are there on the top, managing all the men in the in the work. It's not something that they brag about. What they brag about is what can we do as a team. Apa lagi?
I think one question maybe from Mbak Ainun. There is any question from Mbak Ainun? I still open
Silakan.
your video, Mbak Ainun.
Silakan, Mbak.
Mbak Ainun.
Jangan malu.
Mana Mbak Ainun? Tadi buka video dia. Kok tidak ada di sini?
Mungkin sudah lapar.
Okay. So we can continue this discussion maybe at 31 May
Yeah.
again.
So in 31 May, we will share some cases, maybe cases that are not really, not really documented, but more on anecdotal cases. But we could also share some which are based on actual experience. But it would also be good if you could look at some So if you could also share some of these cases, because we also want to answer questions like, can care be both a personal virtue and a political ethic? How do we create policies that value care without reinforcing gender roles? So maybe these are some questions that we want to answer next meeting. So share one case in Australia, a Rio Tinto company revealed a work culture full of sexual harassment, intimidation, where women reported feeling unsafe at mine sites. Oh, the biggest case, racism, where Black women experience. Yes, really, Black women are we pity the Black women, because anywhere they go, they may be racist, would look at them differently. And as we say, care is also justice, only seeing it differently. And that is why we have a different voice to take a stand on. Banyak terima kasih.
Thank you so much for the answer, Professor Benjamin. I think the time is up. Thank you for the speaker who have wonderful discussion today. New perspective, new knowledge for us about reality. I hope everyone have some point from this lecture, especially about the care should be the foundation of moral education and political ethics. And I also highlight the care is not the opposite of justice, but it is the foundation of the justice. And then the third is about care and justice need to work together. I think that's the point of the material today. Thank you so much, Professor Benjamin.
Thank you.
Last, maybe I like to audience, Mrs. Ika, Mrs. Erlina, Pak Faisal, thank you so much for the active today.
Thank
in the
you for your
class.
time. Thank you for space. Thank you, Professor, for very insightful sharing.
And then let me turn back to the moderator. Mrs. Erlina, over to you.
Oke, kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada Prof. Benjamin Paula Gonzalez Flor, PhD, atas penjelasan dan kesempatan yang dapat dibagikan, baik ilmu dan pengetahuan kepada kami, dan juga terima kasih kepada Ibu Fitri Chandrawardana, PhD, yang telah memandu jalannya diskusi pada pagi hari ini. Demikian Bapak Ibu rangkaian kegiatan 3-in-1 pada hari ini yang sangat menarik dan bermanfaat. Sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih telah berpartisipasi dalam kegiatan 3-in-1 dari program Magister Kajian Wanita Sekolah Pascasarjana Universitas Brawijaya. Dan kami informasikan untuk sesi yang kedua bersama narasumber Profesor Benjamin Paula Gonzalez Flor, PhD, akan dilaksanakan pada tanggal 31 Mei 2025 dengan tema Feminism Social and Ethnical Case Studies. Kami harapkan Bapak Ibu dapat bergabung kembali dalam kegiatan lainnya di Sekolah Pascasarjana yang akan datang. Saya mewakili panitia dan teman-teman tim teknis yang bertugas pada acara hari ini. Mohon maaf jika ada kesalahan atau hal-hal yang kurang berkenan selama jalannya acara. Mari kita tutup acara ini dengan ucapan syukur dan membaca hamdalah. Semoga kegiatan yang telah kita selesaikan ini bermanfaat bagi kita semua. Amin. Akhir kata saya ucapkan wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat berakhir pekan. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Prof. Benjamin, thank you. See you this week.
Terima kasih semuanya. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Professor.
In Zoom, we say peace out. Peace out. Peace out. Don't say bye-bye. Peace
Bye-bye.
out.
Oh, peace out. Philippines.